Hello, everyone. And please join me in welcoming Asif Saleh. Asif is the Senior Director of Strategy, Communications, and Empowerment for BRAC and BRAC International. He oversees the Advocacy, Information and Communication Technology and Communications departments, as well as Social Innovation Lab. He also manages BRAC's empowerment initiatives, including human rights and legal aid services, migration, urban, and youth skills development programs. Prior to joining BRAC in 2011, he was the executive director at Goldman Sachs and previously worked for IBM. He was recognized for his work by Asia Society's Asia 21 program, the Bangladeshi American Foundation, and was selected as an Asia 21 Fellow. Asif connects private and social sectors to develop and scale innovations that uplift some of the world's poorest people. A bit of context on BRAC. BRAC is the world's largest nonprofit organization and is based in Bangladesh. It's a global leader in developing and implementing cost-effective, evidence-based programs to assist more marginalized people in extremely poor, conflict-prone, and post-disaster settings. These include initiatives in education, healthcare, microfinance, girls' empowerment, agriculture, human and legal rights, and more. In 2016, BRAC employed more than 110,000 people in 11 countries with a global expenditure of about 900 million. With low middle-income countries like Bangladesh developing very rapidly, both high and low-tech solutions will be instrumental in bridging growing socioeconomic divide. Asif provides insight on how BRAC will reach 130 million people in changing the way poverty is addressed worldwide. Thank you. Please take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sydney. Let me start talking a little bit about myself, just to give a personal context. I grew up in Bangladesh, and when I was 18, I left to get my higher education in the United States. So I got a degree in computer science, and when I graduated, what I wanted to do with my life was more about solving business problems. And I graduated at a time when tech jobs were quite plentiful. And I landed with 4 offers before I finished my graduation. And I decided to take up a job at Goldman Sachs. And my motivation was that I didn't want to be a programmer who was just coding at the back bench, and just nobody looks at him. I actually wanted to work with people and solve problems. And before I knew it, I spent almost 12 years at Goldman, but working with trading and electronic trading algorithms and all these things. But something was not quite right, and I felt like this was not quite about what I was meant to do. Probably not the kind of problems I wanted to solve for the rest of my life. So I started a charity back in 2001 on my free time, which was a platform for diaspora Bangladeshis to connect and also work on a cause for human rights victims in Bangladesh. And the idea was that to raise awareness on the human rights issues and also to rehabilitate them. And I'm glad to see there's a fellow member here, Zoe Farouk, who's here, who was a member of this, and I connected with a lot of young Bangladeshis during that time. And the organization actually grew quite rapidly. Before I knew it, we had like 9 chapters in 9 cities, and we were connected all around the world, and we were doing projects. And we had 5,000 people on our network. And that was my thing. I figured that this is something that I was kind of prone to do. And so I had to take a leap of faith. I had to decide what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So at one point, I decided to end my career at Goldman and move back to Bangladesh, and started to work in the development sector. And then that's where the rest of my life started. So I actually, from the #1 investment bank, I joined the #1 NGO, which is the BRAC. So quite a large shift. But interestingly, to add to what Sadia said about BRAC, I think when I joined BRAC, it was quite an interesting learning because BRAC is something so unique that there isn't a lot of charity organizations like BRAC. Because BRAC kind of uses whatever works to solve a development problem. So whether it's business, or it's a market-based solutions, I think it's fairly agnostic to what kind of solution would work. And that resulted to BRAC from being a very small relief organizations to what a giant behemoth that is right now, which has very, very large-scale programs in education, to running the largest non-government school network, to one of the largest microfinance network, to very big health networks all around the country. And it expanded outside Bangladesh about 12 years ago. Now it's in 12 other countries. So as you heard that, it's a total budget, global budget is about $1.1 billion, with about 70% of Bangladesh's budget comes from its own resources. And we are slowly towards on a path to become self-dependent for our Bangladesh programs in the next 5 to 7 years. So, but what BRAC has is that, it's quite unique in the sense that it has these large-scale programs that I mentioned. It also has about 15 social enterprises. It has about 7 large investments that it made, from bank to insurance companies to various other university. It's quite unique. But there is a kind of a method to all this large expansion. And in order to get to that, I think I should talk about a quote that our founder, Sir Fazle Hassan Abed, talks about a lot of time, which is poverty is not just poverty of money or income. We also see a poverty of self-esteem, hope, opportunity, and freedom. People trapped in a cycle of destitution often don't realize their lives can be changed for the better through their own activities. Once they understand that, it's like a light gets turned on. So at BRAC, we are in the business of turning those lights on. So whether it's about financial inclusion or education or any of our livelihoods program, it's all about turning that light on, giving people the tool so that they can change their lives. So today, I'm going to tell you 2 stories, 30 years apart, about 2 of the biggest challenges we've faced, and what we learned about the role of technology and social innovation in those challenges. So first case story is about a fairly low-tech solution with a high-touch approach. Imagine you are an illiterate mother back in the early 80s in Bangladesh, in rural Bangladesh. You live in an extremely remote region. The country is still reeling economically from the war that happened about 10 years ago. But this isn't your biggest concern. Your concern is about your sick child who's suffering from diarrhea. And your thoughts are consumed with her because you don't know what to do. The nearest hospital is about 5 miles. You don't have the money to take your child to the hospital. You don't have access to any physician nearby. So what do you do in that situation? Particularly when you know that about 1 out of 5 children in your community dies suffering from diarrhea. Dehydration that caused from diarrhea and cholera was one of the primary killers of child under 5 in Bangladesh. About 1 out of 7 children in Bangladesh right after war won't make it to their 5th birthday. So when that's the scenario you're working on, actually this kind of related of why we had so many children. Each household had so many children in there, because if you don't know how many would survive, you actually don't think about family planning that much. Actually, recently there was a quote by Melinda Gates the other day, who highlighted that if parents believe their children will survive, and if they have the power to time and space their pregnancies, they would choose to have fewer children. So parents living in poverty in rural Bangladesh didn't have control over their children's lives or their futures. So it wasn't that there wasn't a solution available. There was. Actually, in the 60s, there was a breakthrough in treatment for diarrhea, right? A concoction of water, sugar, and salt called oral rehydration therapy, or ORT, was tested by a group of researchers. However, this concoction that given to the children at the right time would actually save 96.5% of the children, as opposed to 70% who would not make it. But there was another problem. The treatment was out of reach for poor families and remained mostly in the hospitals. Because one, you had to get the proportion right. The researchers did have the idea that at some point they will market it and they will make the instruction available for people. But when you have illiterate mothers all around the country, that instructions actually are not very useful. When you have instructions about giving spoons and measurements right, when most of the households don't have even spoons, it doesn't really work. So what do you do in that kind of situation? Because if you don't get the measurement right, if you have too much salt, it may kill your baby. If you have too much sugar, it may actually reverse the effect of the ORT saline. So that's where I guess the power of delivery comes in. Around that time, so BRAC was about 10 years old, and there was a guy called Sir Fazle Hassan Abed who moved back from London, leaving his cushy job at Shell Oil, and decided that he was going to actually work towards rebuilding the country after the war. And pretty soon, the relief organization actually slowly expanded into other development activities. And he was from the private sector, and he understood scale very well. And he was all about problem solving. So when he heard about the problem, one of the things that he tried, but he started experimenting in his kitchen with unrefined sugar, known as gur in Bangladesh, which is fairly well available in rural areas. So he found out that about 3 finger pinch of salt, a handful of sugar, gur, and half a liter of boiled water actually can have the same effect that this World Health Organization that came up with the antidote for the ORT solution. So that's how the easy-to-make solution arrived. But then how do you actually teach it to the rest of the country? How do you actually go to mothers and tell them that this is actually going to work and this is what you should do? So that's where the biggest challenge came in. And World Bank's president recently said at a quote that it's not the question of what to deliver, it's about how to deliver it. In the social development space, it's all about not just the innovation itself, but how do you actually deliver the innovation. So a media advocacy campaign would have worked at that time. I wouldn't have worked at that time because only 20% people have access to radio and television. So it would have to be sandals on the ground, people talking to people, people changing behaviors. So that's what BRAC started to do. So it recruited at small groups of women from communities to become health promoters themselves. The groups traveled on foot, went door to door, showing mothers how to make these solutions. Later, monitors went in and checked whether how many of those mothers actually learned how to make those solutions. And it was an iterative process. There was failures plentiful. We learned as we went along. So staff tweaked their approach as they went along. And one thing, one example of our learning has been that when the monitors went back after the first lot of training happened, we found out that about 90% of these mothers learned how to make those solutions. So you would think that was a success. But only 10% of them actually gave it to their children when their children were sick. So people were scratching their heads, what went wrong? A group of anthropologists were sent to do some research. And they found out, was very interesting, not rocket science, but because the fathers weren't involved in this process and they were the key decision makers, so they actually wouldn't let the mothers give this strange concoction to their child when they got sick. So that's when the next battle started. So we started training men. We started training the fathers. So, and this is just an example, but there are, as other issues evolved, the process was continuously modified, and which led to continuous improvement of the outcome itself. So BRAC then worked with the Bangladeshi government, of course, to kind of scale up nationwide. It basically eventually went to every single household in Bangladesh, teaching mothers how to make ORT. And that's a media advocacy campaign followed to sustain the effect eventually. And just to kind of finish off the story, I mean, there was a long article on this in New Yorker magazine a couple of years ago. I'm just going to read a few quotes. Coaxing villagers to make the solution with their own hands and explain the messages in their own words while a trainer observed and guided them achieved far more than any public service ad or instructional video could have done. Over time, the changes could be sustained with television and radio, and the growth of demand led to the development of a robust market for manufactured oral rehydration salt. 3 decades later, national surveys have found that almost 90% of children with severe diarrhea were given the solution. Child deaths from diarrhea plummeted more than 80% between 1980 and 2005. Bangladesh now has the highest use of ORT in the world. So this is the quote I love, and I think it's relevant to a lot of you who are in technology. I mean, we yearn for frictionless technology solutions, but people talking to people is still the way norms and standards change. So there were some early lessons in this, just to kind of quickly summarize. Even in 30 years ago, I know data is big now, but even 30 years ago, data was king then at that time as well. We constantly looked at the numbers and evolved. Number 2, social innovation is not just about a product innovation. It's about a continuous process of adjustment and tweaking as you go along. It's about process innovation as well. And number 3, the simpler your solution is, the easier it is to scale. So it's very, very relevant to that, the part of the world we operate in. So fast forward about 30 years later. So this is the second case story I'm going to talk about, which is more about when high tech meets high touch. How do you get rural women and men, of course, to trust and understand that mobile money will improve their lives? Just to set a context, and there's a story that our microfinance director talks about, that when we introduced mobile money for our microfinance borrowers to pay their loans on time, they would send the mobile money through their phone, and then they would walk to our offices and come and say that, make sure that it actually has come through. And because I think that's in a country where system often fails, you always want that piece of paper to make sure that this is your proof that you actually have done it. You don't actually have a lot of trust in your system. So it was actually quite interesting, because to have them trust an SMS message of confirmation was actually quite a large shift. So the idea for mobile money came in from a different context. I mean, I think when 30 years later, Bangladesh has become a lot more urbanized. It's not as rural anymore. Also, people have become a lot more mobile. They're traveling, they're seasonal migrants who are coming back and forth from villages to cities. They're working in the cities, and they want to send money to their families. So there was a big need of safe, reliable, and affordable means of sending money back home. Of course, people found a very creative way of sending money. They send it through the overnight bus service. They would send the money through post office, through selling airtime, or physically carrying cash home every few months. But there was a big need of something which actually did it quickly and reliably. So that's where the solution came in, which is the bCash, the mobile financial service. Inspired by the success in East Africa with M-Pesa and some of the other companies that work really well in Africa, BRAC Bank started bCash in 2011 with a mission towards including the very bottom of the people financially, which means that actually not only just remittance, but the big vision is that introducing financial products and services that works for the poor. So it was a great fit for Bangladesh because in Bangladesh we have 90% of the household which has mobile phone, but only 30% has bank accounts. So if you can give people with the phone a bank account, should work wonders. But the problem was, so before I get into the problem a bit, just to give you an understanding of how the solution worked, it's not just a mobile-to-mobile money. There's a role of an agent network within the organization. The idea is that a rickshaw puller, say, who works in the city, wants to send money to his family, would actually go to an agent who would actually take the physical cash, put it in his bank account, mobile money account, and then have the money transferred to either directly to the family or to an agent who lives nearby of the family member, and then the family could use it. I mean, if the money was transferred to the bank account of the sender, they could also use it for other purposes as well, like buying things directly. But we don't have the ecosystem yet quite ready. So money is mostly being used for remittance purposes. So this is how it worked. But the problem was that then it also went on to the delivery. Nobody knew bCash, right? Why would people trust bCash? But everybody knew BRAC at that time. And BRAC, this is just our sort of operations in terms of where we are in terms of in the country itself. So we have a network all across the country. So what we started to build up was this agent network. And we worked with all these borrowers that we have who actually owns stores. So there are these small shop owners who we went to and says that, you know the community knows you, are you interested to be an agent? And initially there was like not a lot of understanding, but people came along listening to us because we said this is gonna work for you and this is gonna work for everybody else in the community as well. So about 10,000 agents signed up initially. And once we did it, and that's where the early adopters came in. And then we started working with growing the user base going forward. And the rest is pretty much history because, I mean, bCash has seen a very, very rapid expansion over the last 5 years. Just to show you some numbers, I mean, this is a slightly dated number, but we now have, it is now the largest mobile financial service in terms of how many people have direct accounts in the world right now. We have about close to, in Bangladesh, we have about 41 million people with accounts, and about 80% of them are bCash account holders. You can see some of the numbers, the rapid growth. I mean, we have almost close to about $50 million being transacted daily. Now the agent network boasts about 600,000 around the country. It all just happened in just 4 years. But I mean, we didn't want to rest in this laurel, however. I mean, because as I said, that the primary mission was to actually empower the poor financially. So we looked at the numbers again, and we saw that there were far less women who signed up than men for the bCash accounts. And at the same time, people were still accessing it primarily as through the agent network, not directly accessing themselves. And if you don't access it directly yourself, then financial products and services built up for you, you're not going to actually see a lot of benefit for it. So I'm going to see a small video in terms of how we took that as a next step in terms of increasing the literacy for women. And this will probably give you a bit of a glimpse what we mean by this high-touch involvement. Let's look at a 2-minute video very quickly.
আমার নাম নুরবান ফোন হাতে নিছি বিয়ার 2 মাস পর ফোনটা যখন হাতে নিছি তখন ভয় লাগছে কারণ সিস্টেম জানি না রিসিভ করতে জানি না স্বামী টাকা পাঠাইতো আঙ্গ বাড়ির পাশে একজনের পাঠায় টাকা বুঝতাম চাইলে কইতো মুখখানে থুইছি ডাকাতের ডরে সন্ত্রাসের ডরে তা না তো আজ গেলাই গো হে আর 4-5 দিন পরে তো
মোবাইল মানি ব্যবহারের প্রথম পদ্ধতি আমরা উদ্যোগ করছি
আমাদের বাড়িতে যাই বলছে যে বিকাশ করলে আপনার অনেক যে কোনো ভাজি গেছেন স্বামী দ্বারা ফোন দিয়েছেন স্বামী টাকা পাঠাই দিয়েছেন আপনারা আর কোনো জায়গায় যান লাগবে না আমার হাতও দেন লাগবে না অফিসে আপনারা হারাই তখন আমরা কইছি যে টাকা যদি দিলে চলি এই টাকা আঙুরে কে দিই আমরা এগিন করতাম জানি না আমরা এগিন করতাম
ধার কীভাবে করতে এটাও আমরা প্রথম শিখেছি 1 থেকে 10 পর্যন্ত প্রথম আমরা তাদেরকে 10 শিখে না
অনেকেই মুখ্য যে টাকা আসছে কিনা ওইটা জানে না মেসেজ তারা চিনে না করতে পারে না মেসেজগুলো ইংরেজিতে হয় এক ব্যালেন্স কোন ফাংশন আছে এটা শিখানোর পরে 5 পরে কি ক্লিক করতে হয় ওইটা দেখাইছি 5 পরে একের পরে এরপরে এক ব্যালেন্স দেখছি মানে পারতেছে এরপরে শিখেছি তাদেরকে বাইয়ের টাইম কীভাবে নিজের মোবাইল থেকে নিজে লোড লওয়া যায়
আমি যে ম্যানেজগুলো ওদেরকে শিখাইছি ওরা নিজেরা ব্যবহার করতে পারতেছে ওটাতে ওরা খুশি আমরা যে শিখাইছি আমরাও সন্তুষ্ট
মোবাইল ব্যাংকে মনে করেন টাকা যদি জমা রাখি এটা তো অনেক লাভ স্বামী যদি কোনো সমতে টিয়া হারাই তো হারে না আর মোবাইলে জমা আছে আই কিস্তি দিয়ে দিছি সঞ্চয় দিয়ে দিছি গুট লোন আছে গুট লোন দিয়ে দিছি ছেলে মাদ্রাসা করে মাসে মাসে বেতন মোবাইলে ভাড়াই দিই হুজুরের বিকাশ আছে যদি আর মোবাইল সরে লইয়া যারা পিন নাম্বার তো আর জানাই আছে আজ সিম তুলি লেছি বিকাশ থেকে আর টাকা আই হাই গেছি আজ শিখছি আইয়া জানি আর পিন নাম্বার আসছে না
বর্তমান প্রেক্ষাপটে আমরা এটাকে দায়িত্ব হিসেবে নিয়েছি কারণ মানুষ তো অনেক পিছিয়ে করে মানুষগুলো যদি আমাদের দ্বারা উন্নত হয় তাহলে এটা তো আমাদের একটা আত্মতৃপ্তি
So the work's still ongoing. I mean, I think the user experience needs to be a lot better, so we are working on that. But I think there are some key learnings, right? I mean, in both these two stories. So I think in person-to-person interaction does shift social norms and builds trust. And for a lot of technology adoption, it's not just about technology itself, right? It's about changing mindsets. So it's very important to have that person-to-person interaction. And then secondly, which is very relevant to the first one, that it's not the product itself, and it's not how we deliver. Technology is actually as important, if not more, than the technology itself. And the last one is that when high tech meets high touch, the earlier days of tech adoption actually really happens at that time. And I think that's also where the magic happens. I think, and I want to sort of kind of end in that note that it's sitting in like 2017 right now, there are so many immense sort of progress that has happened in technology and about to come in the next few years. We are looking at some amazing disruption can happen in this market. You can think about, I'm imagining these 100,000 healthcare promoters who are across the country having access to this tool, diagnostic tool, who can go house to house, collect data, send data to the cloud, have AI engine looking at it, give some diagnostic ideas and link them to specialists all around the world. Amazing things can happen. I'm thinking very focused, customized, specific product, financial product being delivered to various groups all around the country. Because you have access to the data, Bikash is sitting on a huge data gold mine, understanding when people send money, what will do with the money. You can actually come up with very, very useful products in the coming days. You can look at the jobs market, informal, formal, both, how you can make matches so that you can increase the wages for the people who don't have access to those key information. So amazing things can happen in the coming days. I mean, I just want to sort of think that, if Google will all its resources, smarter engineers that you guys are all out here, you can partner with some of the most sophisticated distribution network that we have at BRAC. Real magic can happen in the coming days and real disruption can happen. And personally speaking, over the last few years, as I have learned to have bigger dreams, I actually have learned to appreciate slow innovations a lot more than I used to. This is a picture of a train station, and particularly during a festival time. I love to show this picture because in our presentation, I mean, it's a chaotic region, it's a chaotic country, enormously resource constrained, but at the same time, there are enormous social capital, enormous resilience that is built into the social fabric of the country. So we do come up with this interesting social innovation. So I actually have a lot more appreciation for this than I used to have in the past. So I will conclude at that and then would love to hear you guys in the coming. Thank you so much.
So the first question is, how can global tech companies based in Silicon Valley work with BRAC across its existing programs in microfinance, healthcare, education, et cetera? Excuse me. Is it possible to collaborate on opportunities, ideas?
Yeah, I think there are more opportunities than ever now because not only, so BRAC actually works in Bangladesh and 11 other countries in Asia and Africa as well. We almost use Bangladesh as a hub for experimentation. So the idea is that we have these large sort of distribution channels, as I was mentioning, both in the financial sector, education, and other sector, which lets us scale up relatively easily. But what we lack is we don't have so much technical prowess over there. And I think with the infrastructure getting ready in the country and also the region, so it's not so much about all the access is an issue. I think they're still an issue, but they're going to be resolved very quickly in the next 2 or 3 years. But what we lack is this matchmaking to happen. I think basically we need smarter products and services that are designed, built for thinking about those people in the next billion market. And then we need a very smart distribution channel and this high-touch approach that we mentioned. So we have a social innovation lab at BRAC, which looks at some of these issues. I mean, this innovation fund thing that you saw, innovation mobile money thing that you saw on the video, it's being supported by Gates Foundation, but this is something that is run by the innovation lab. So we are looking constantly at external opportunities where we can make these matches. So I think particularly in the next 3-4 years, I see a lot of these kinds of partnerships being built because in every sector, whether you call it health, education, financial sector, agriculture, technology is becoming the disruptor. And the faster we sort of adopt and have those high-touch approaches, I think there are tremendous gains to be made in the coming days.
Okay, so is BRAC doing any programs for startups in developing countries?
Yes, I mean, basically what we have started in Bangladesh, again, we have had a number of things, both internally and externally. From the lab, we run a number of innovation funds, very focused. So one thing, we started a mobile money innovation fund where we asked our large workforce, there was an internal competition like what, we said that give us your idea on how mobile money can improve service delivery for the poor people. That attracted a lot of entrepreneurs to give their ideas, and some of these ideas we piloted and expanded. Then we launched another innovation fund for urban challenges. Urbanization, as you know, is the biggest challenge now, unplanned urbanization in that part. So we asked for external companies and innovators to give their ideas. So what we are doing now is we are incubating them for about a year. So we are working with them in terms of grounding their ideas with our network. And then if some of these actually stick, then we are going to help them launch to become a full-fledged company and help them with initial financing. We're also basically expanding and doing a lot of investments in terms of some of the new startups. We just recently made an equity investment in a tech startup called Maya, whose founder is here, Ivy Russell.
Excellent. Welcome.
Maya is doing great work in terms of creating a community for women and providing them basic services. So they have some fantastic ideas and expansion going forward as well. So the idea is not that this BRAC will have to do everything. The idea is that as long as it's true to the mission, we will have a network of organizations who will do the same work that we want to do. And then sometimes it's actually they can do it better. Actually, so they're very focused and they actually can do the work a lot better. So in the coming days, you'll see a lot more expansion like this where we're going to be investing in companies.
So you mentioned that BRAC has moved into other countries. So I'm curious, what changes and what stays the same when you take programs to other countries?
Very good question. Actually, a lot changes. I mean, we don't necessarily take everything as is. And sometimes also not necessarily everything happens in Bangladesh first. Sometimes we also see the reverse innovation as well. But I think what we see in common is that so across the new countries we operate, these are mostly fragile economies in the new or either post-conflict countries. So we start typically with microfinance, financial inclusion, and then as it starts to build the network, then we go into other programs. In some areas that we see that a common element is this the role of the community, the social capital. We have a certain things very common across the board. We try to build them as part of the program design. We have the notion of the social network. We formed these clubs with the young people in Uganda, which worked really well, which again, the genesis came from a program in Bangladesh, but then it morphed into something else. In Bangladesh, we didn't have microfinance built into the young people's clubs. Here in Uganda, when we saw that this was actually a big need because a lot of these, early pregnancy was a big problem. And a lot of these single mothers, they want to get into jobs and livelihood generation. So we introduced the idea of financial inclusion fairly early in these clubs. So that's how we actually tweaked the model over time. And we are now looking at taking some of our skills learning. We have gone into the skills programming quite big in Bangladesh, and we want to kind of take some of those in other parts of Africa as well.
Thanks for a wonderful talk. Excuse me. You talked about, while you talked about Big Cash, you mentioned about trust factor. One of the area your Big Cash could be very useful at the remittance is the e-commerce. And e-commerce has a huge amount of trust factor deficiency. Yeah. What do you have learned in the remittance sections of the Big Cash transaction that could be useful for e-commerce as well in Bangladesh or outside as well? Yeah.
So I think e-commerce in Bangladesh is starting to take off, but there are still lots of issues because the ecosystem is not quite built yet. You still have problems with the delivery of packages, and so the distribution channel is not quite there. But I think we are seeing, I mean, if you look at, although the numbers are fairly small in the early stage, if you look at the numbers, they look very, very promising. So if you're, but interestingly, we have a large retail chain called Arong. Those of you from Bangladesh, you know Arong. It's actually started Arong.com about a few years ago. And from some of the numbers there, we see, I think, not different from India, people still are not very sort of comfortable in doing electronic purchasing. They are still doing cash on delivery. The cash on delivery is not good for e-commerce sector but people are still more comfortable in doing that. And so in Arong.com's number, about 70% of the purchases still happen through CODs. And bKash numbers are relatively smaller, but I think that's also due to the fact that user experience. I think bKash is launching a new app in this year, which is going to make the user experiences a lot better. But I think, but once that happens, the bKash will actually should take off more quickly than a credit card, because credit card is more difficult. I think nobody is hand-holding anybody in e-commerce. I think that's the big factor. But this notion of associated e-commerce has started in India, which basically uses an intermediary, right? So you have these centers where people can go to, and they have access to internet and laptops and all that, and they help you browse. This is what you have available, and then basically they let you buy it, and the packages actually come to that center, and so they take a small cut, and then they basically make the fee. So that's becoming also, that has also started to happen. So I think same kind of hand-holding, so somebody to take them through that experience, initially that needs to happen. So I think that's a interesting learning, because right now we're just kind of assuming that it's just going to happen automatically, and it's not.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Last question, I guess it's coming from the Dory. Is BRAC considering expanding to India?
This request has come in quite a lot, but I think in the past, we have worked with partners in India. India is a bit more complicated in terms of regulations, and it's, so what we want to do is work with partners. I mean, I think we have got specific invitations to work in the education sector, microfinance sector. So we worked with a company called Bandhan in the past, which was started by a former BRAC staff and now has become the largest microfinance institute in India, and has become the big national bank. So yeah, we would love to work in India as long as we can find the right partner, but we are not going to directly start an operation there. Thank you so much for your time, and